Chaos! I've grinded up to item level 500. You stand no chance!
Chaos. I'm here today to talk to you about chaos, and nothing but chaos will be discussed in this video about chaos. Naturally, I'm talking about Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins, which is a game that I've been streaming here on the channel. Been having an absolute blast with the game, and now that I feel like I'm kind of done with it, I wanted to talk to you guys about my experience with this game, the things that I personally liked, the things that I didn't like, and just my overall opinion on it. So, I understand that I'm pretty late to the party because obviously this game came out so long ago, but we also just had DLC recently here on the 27th of January, so there might be people who are considering jumping into the game at this point, and I will tell you how I personally feel about it and hopefully give you some context as to what you can expect from this title and what the experience was like. So, let's get started. Usually I start these things by talking about the visuals and sound and all of that stuff. I feel like the visuals when it comes to Stranger of Paradise are okay. The combat animations, I feel, are just fantastic. They do a fantastic job. But on the other hand, cutscene animations, you know, sometimes they're not all there. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some cutscenes that are super solid. There are other cutscenes where I feel like the characters moved in a little bit of an awkward way. And, you know, there are some things there that could have been improved. I'm not sure if the game was rushed or not because I didn't really play it on release. I remember playing, like, a beta or something that they released back then. And when I played that beta, I didn't really like it. I think I made even a video about it, like 30 minutes, something around that length. And yeah, I just remember not really enjoying the game all of that much because I felt like the difficulty was potentially tuned a little bit too high. And that kind of like turned me off of the game. Not just that, but also the art style had a couple of problems with the version that we had in the beta, at least for me, where a lot of things in the game were way too dark. And then if you tried, you know, upping the brightness, they became way too bright. In the final game, I didn't really experience that nearly as much. There were a couple of sections that felt maybe a little bit too dark, but it also has to do with like capture cards and HDMI cables of my own personal setup. I'm pretty sure that if you have a standard setup of a console connected to the TV, you probably didn't experience this. But overall, in the base game, like I said, visuals are okay. They're still not really going to blow your mind or anything like that. The combat animations, I feel, are just like really, really good because, you know, the feedback that you get from the combat and all that feels good, but we'll talk more about that when we get into gameplay. But in the cutscenes, I feel like that could have used a little bit of work. Also, I'm not sure, because usually I don't talk about loading times all that much in most of my videos, so I'm not sure where I should talk about it, but considering that you're talking about visuals, textures, all of that stuff, I felt that the loading times for Stranger of Paradise were a little bit longer than I would have expected when you take into account the complexity of the levels, the level of visual detail that you experience. I feel like at least in the PlayStation 5, I don't know if this released on Xbox or not, but you know, I played it on the PS5. I feel like with the hard drive not hard drive, but the SSD that you have, it's not even an SSD, it's an NVMe, the NVMe drive that you have on the PlayStation 5. I feel like it's capable of doing much, much more, and I feel like this game had an unusually long loading time in a way that it didn't seem like it really should, because you compare it to like things that are much more detailed and have much more, you know, bigger environments, stuff like that, and you can usually see, oh, this thing loads way faster than that, so I don't understand why your game doesn't load faster. So that would have been one of the minor complaints that I have, but it didn't really bother me too much, except near the end where I was constantly swapping between extra mode and normal mode and experimenting with builds and doing all of these things, which meant that I would be jumping into missions and then jumping out of missions and then jumping back into missions. And so near the end, it started bothering me a lot more than at the start, where at the start you load into a level, then you're there for like an hour or maybe 30 minutes or whatever, depending on how competent you are at clearing those levels. So it's not like you're constantly seeing it. But in my case, yeah, it was weird. And there was also something about the structure of how sometimes you would load into a mission just to watch a cutscene, which in my opinion could have just been at the end of the mission. Then you watch the cutscene, then you exit out, and that was the mission. It wasn't about the structure there that was also a little bit weird. But then again, maybe I'm just being a little bit too too nitpicky with that stuff because that wasn't really super problematic. In terms of sound and soundtrack, I feel like the sounds are pretty good. The soundtrack had a couple of tracks that I really vibed with. Then I had some tracks that I didn't vibe with as much, but I appreciate what they tried doing with the soundtrack by going to different places because I like it when soundtracks take chances. They don't just play it safe and be like, oh, we're going to just have a classical orchestral track or whatever. Like, this game has a wide variety of tracks. Some might gel with you, some might not. And I appreciate that, even though it's nothing like to be like, oh my god, it's amazing, the best thing ever. No, but I appreciate that they took chances with it, is what I'm saying. So I enjoyed that. Now, in terms of story, when it comes to the story of Stranger of Paradise, it is one of those elements that I could take it or leave it. It doesn't really mean much to me. I think that this story is going to be a lot more interesting to people that played the original Final Fantasy, like the very first one, because this is supposed to be kind of like a prequel or something. This is something that I got from my interactions with my chat during my stream, because I wasn't actually too aware of where this game takes place in terms of like Final Fantasy timelines or anything like that. But people would tell me that supposedly this takes place before Final Fantasy 1, so I feel like if you're someone who played the original Final Fantasy, or if you even just know the story of the original Final Fantasy, which I personally don't, I think that the story is going to be a lot more meaningful for you. Whether you're going to enjoy it or not, I still wouldn't be able to tell you, because this is one of those stories that it's kind of hard to describe what it does without getting into spoiler territory. In a way, it's almost like not that it really matters, because you can find spoilers on the official website, which is kind of weird, despite the fact that then later in the game they reveal something that is literally written on the website of the game, and they reveal it like it's this big revelation. And I was like, yeah, okay. So it's like the story was not really the thing that was pulling me. I still enjoyed parts of it. An interesting thing is that initially everybody was memeing on the character of Jack because of the whole chaos thing, right? I mean, I memed just at the start of this video, and I'm like, chaos. We'll talk nothing but chaos. Because it was kind of like one of the first trailers that they did, where they were, you know, I'm not sure how many people saw that trailer, but basically the character of Jack just goes like, chaos. I have to kill chaos. I'm here to kill chaos. And it's just like, you know, there's this obsession about chaos, which makes sense from a story perspective, by the way. It actually does make sense for them to showcase that in that trailer. And now that I've played through the game, I understand why they did it. But the thing is, I feel like the people who did that, they were so deep into the development of the game or testing the game or whatever, that they didn't stop to think, what are people outside of our circle going to think about this character just being completely obsessed with chaos, and us just like triple downing on that aspect on the trailer, right? But you know, it's whatever. It's not really a it's not something that, like I said, the story didn't grab me that much, but I think the story is fine. It's fun enough to play through, and the thing about the character of Jack is that I like how simple he is at some points, and I don't mean simple as in dumb. I mean simple as in, maybe simple is the wrong word. I like how blunt he is, which is like sometimes you would get bosses starting on a monologue, and Jack would just be like, I don't give a what you think. You guys know it, that, you know, I have to self-censor now because Aunt Susan wouldn't be happy if I was to curse in this video. So, you know, the character of Jack just like goes off the walls over nothing. It's like, no, I'm just here to kill chaos. And he just wants to get stuff done. He'll like jump in the middle of a cutscene and just like start punching stuff while bosses are trying to go in the middle of a big monologue that you usually have in video games. And so those things to me were things that I really appreciated. I appreciate how blunt the character is, which is something that I liked way more than I initially expected. I thought it was going to be a meme, but I was like, no, I actually legitimately dig this. This is pretty cool. You really leaned into it all the way, and I'm here for it, you know? So, you know, that's kind of like my opinion on the story. I think that some people will like it, some people will not like it. It is what it is. Now, in terms of gameplay was definitely the drive. I loved the gameplay, which is something that I initially didn't expect because, like I said, the original beta that I played really turned me off of the game to the point where I didn't even consider it when the game came out. I was like, I don't care about this game. It's whatever. I played that demo. It was trash. I didn't like it. Whatever. If you like it, it's whatever. But eventually, when I started playing it, I was like, wow, this feels way better than that demo ever did. Like way better, like night and day better, right? And so that experience, it was good. Just like discovering the whole system, discovering the class system, which is actually pretty cool. Initially, it's very overwhelming. But once you start engaging with it and you're like, okay, I'll put this thing, then this unlocks the other class, then the other class. Although I also think that they could have trimmed down the number of classes potentially, because there are a lot of classes that basically don't matter almost, at least in my personal opinion. Maybe if you are more experienced in the game, then you can let me know in the comments how you feel about that. But to me, I felt like there were several classes that straight up didn't really matter, and they end up just kind of like cluttering the UI when you're trying to get to the classes that you actually care about. But again, maybe that's a little bit of a nitpick. But I greatly enjoyed, planning out the class that I was going to be. I like the fact that you get multi-classing. So for those of you that aren't aware, when you play this game, you basically choose 2 classes for yourself that you can switch at the press of a button. So you can literally be playing a character that's like a melee type fighter, right? Then you press a button and now you're a ranged caster, which I personally think is really fun, and it's pretty cool because it allowed you to explore different playstyles, and I definitely explored that because I played a ton of, well, maybe not a ton of different classes, because I was trying to optimize classes that had a shield, but I experimented with a lot of different classes for the secondary one. So I'd be playing a sage so that I could be buffing my allies, and then I would, swap over to tank mode, beat the crap out of boss, then swap back, do an AoE regen, put shields on everybody. At some point, I even resurrected allies because I had raise, and it was cool. It was very interesting. It was also, there were certain combinations that were definitely completely and utterly busted, which is, it's kind of like the balancing of all of that is completely and absolutely insane, which is one of the reasons why I ended up, kind of burning out, not near the end, but after the end. After the end of the game was when things started going south for me really, really fast. But we'll talk more about that. But, from an action standpoint, from, the structure of the game, I thought it was fine, because it's kind of like if you played Neo, this pretty much plays like Neo, but with a Final Fantasy skin. You have a map. That map has locations. You go to those locations. You do the missions. After you do the mission, that mission is cleared. New missions show up. Things start scaling in terms of like gear level. You start equipping your gear, all of that, and then you go in. You also have combos, and you have tons of customization for classes because, like I said, you have 2 different classes. For those classes, you're going to have a common thing, which are these command abilities, of which you have 4. One of them is set in stone, which is, I forget what it's called. It's light. I think it's Light Breaker. So Light Breaker is set in stone, which is something where you superpower yourself and you just deal break damage because the game uses a system where you break your enemies and that opens them up for a finishing blow. If you think of like something like Sekiro, it's not exactly like that, but it's something similar because this is something that's been in the Neo games as well, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've played Neo, but I'm pretty sure you can break enemies and then you can just like do finishing moves, right? And that is something that you do a lot in this game. So each enemy has a break gauge, you attack them, break gauge diminishes, and then you can finish them off. And certain attacks deal more HP damage, other attacks deal more break gauge damage. But, that's kind of like the way that you navigate the whole system. You have your combos. So you have these command abilities, and these can be either buffs or sometimes they can be attacks, can be a different thing. So you have 4 command abilities for both your classes. Then each of the classes has things that you can change in terms of their combos. So say for instance you do R1, which is light attack, and then you have R2, which is not necessarily heavy attack. It's kind of like let's call it alternate attack, because depending on the class that you have is going to do different things. So for instance, if you press R2 and you're a warrior, your character does a war cry that regens and pushes people away. If you press R2 and you're a liberator, then your character activates an AoE aura that heals everybody around you. So this thing can change drastically, but it is also used to finish your combos. So if you press R1, R2, that's like a combo finisher. And then you can assign specific moves to that, to R1, R2. And then you assign another move to R1, R1, R2. And so you have a set of moves that you can completely customize and change your playstyle. So say, for instance, you can have 10 people play a knight, and every one of those people can have a completely different playstyle. Now, some playstyles are going to naturally be more optimal than others, which is something that we're going to get into. But, basically, there's tons and tons and tons of customization. And then on top of that, there's also the loot, naturally. And each class is going to have access to certain types of weapons, and then each weapon is going to have different movesets and all of that. And the loot is randomly generated like Diablo. And this is, for me, when things start going south. Now, I've always said in the Neo games, I feel like I'm not a huge fan of the way that loot works in those games in general, but I feel like in this game, they really went completely overboard. And the thing is, when I say this, I know that some people will listen to what I'm saying. They'll be like, oh, so you think the loot is bad? No, I don't think the loot is bad. I don't like it, which is two different things. And I want to make that distinction very clear, because I feel like there is probably a group of people that greatly enjoyed this type of loot in this type of game. And I think that it would be very unfair for me to just say that, oh, this loot system sucks. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that I personally don't like it. It is not my kind of thing. Because in a game like this, personally, I feel like less is more. Because there is way too much loot. And I know exactly how that sounds. I know that some people are going to be like, what are you talking about too much loot? Are you dumb? And the thing is, the game drops so much loot, and the loot scales in item levels from 1 to 500 once you get to the DLCs. And so you're constantly wondering, well, what's the point of kind of like optimizing my gear? Let's say, for instance, you're an item level 80 or something like that. What is the point of you optimizing your gear if in the next mission you're going to be getting item level 90 gear? And then once you get the level 90 gear, what's the point of optimizing that if in the next mission you're going to get level 100 gear? Because fundamentally, you can optimize your gear, and I think that would be cool to optimize the gear and try to figure out, okay, what are the things that work really well in my build? What are the things that don't work in my build? Let's actually put a build together. But the thing is, every time that I would go through a mission, let's say I would get about anywhere from 50 to 100 items of varying item levels. Like, the developers are probably aware that this is something that most people don't pay attention to, because they have a button that you can press the touchpad and it automatically equips the highest level the highest levels of items possible for every character in the game, so that you don't have to constantly manage loot. And that to me is like, I want to be engaged with my loot. I want to be selecting the loot that I equip. I want to be looking at stats and all of this thing. But there's just so many stats on this gear. You're talking about, you have a job affinity, which, by the way the job affinities work is like you stack them in terms of percentage. And then once you reach a certain threshold of affinities, they're going to give you additional bonus skills. And then on top of it, it's going to have stats like additional intellect or spirit or some other stat that you might have, like strength, stamina, whatever. And then on top of it, they might bring additional abilities, like actual actions that you put onto your character. And this is all in like one piece of gear. And I was like, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff. And then these things are not properly weighted. So, for instance, you might have a sword, which would give you mage affinity. Mages can't equip swords. And I get it, because you can get bonus from the mage class on your sword class. But the problem is, when you have a loot system like that, trying to plan out and target things that you want for your characters becomes astronomical in terms of the chances of you actually getting the things that you want. And then there are ways of like, changing certain things in your loot and increasing the loot level and all of that. But if you remember from Neo games, and I didn't experience it, I didn't mess around too much with it in this one, but like in Neo games, it was prohibitively expensive to level up an item like a certain amount of levels. And when you have items that go from level 1 to level 500, again, it just made me completely ignore the loot. I was just like, yep, just equip me with whatever's the highest thing, because that's going to give me the most chances of survival and usually the most chances of damage and whatever, and just, let's go. Because again, the levels, they go, if your items would say had a variation between like 1 and 200 or something like that, and then, you know, maybe not receiving 100 items every mission that you do, then I could see myself focusing more on loot. But when we go from 1 to 500, it's just too much. So I feel like the loot was one of the first things that really kind of like turned me off a little bit. But I was just like, okay, I'll just not deal with the loot. I'll just auto-equip and keep pushing through. And I was able to push through the whole game basically doing that. And I was playing on hard difficulty, which is not that hard. It's called hard, but it's not really that hard. But, you know, I played through the whole thing, and I finished the final boss. And in the final boss is when things got kind of weird. So when you get to the end of the game, they superpower your character. I'm not going to go into specifics as to why this happened. Let's just say your character gets a little bit more powerful than usual. So the way that things usually work in the game is you have a mana gauge, which is comprised of like these purple blocks. And, you know, whenever you do a combo, you spend one of that mana gauge or two, depending on the potency of the combo that you use or the skill that you use, the command that you use, whatever. So you use up your mana as you do those things. And then there's another gauge that you have, which is your break gauge. I just told you earlier that enemies have break gauges. So you yourself also have a break gauge. So if enemies hit you multiple times, they break you, and your character like topples over, and you're vulnerable for a couple of seconds. So you have a break gauge. Now, near the end of the game, for story reasons, they superpower your character to the point where you have infinite mana and you have infinite gauge, so they can't break you. Now, I naturally veered towards a class which was called the Liberator. This is because the class had passive things that were made it so that one of the systems that the game has, which is the Soul Shield parry, whatever you call it, it made that a little bit more friendly in terms of timing. And I was like, oh, this is great, because, you know, this way I can kind of like be a little bit more free not free thinking. What is the word? I'm missing a word, but I can be a little bit more liberal in my usage of Soul Shield was my thought process, right? So I like that class. That class also had something else, which was pretty cool, which is an AoE aura that heals you and your allies. So I was having a lot of fun with the Liberator class. Now, there was a passive skill in the Liberator class tree, which essentially said, so long as your aura is active, your HP can't go below 0. Now, this is really cool. You guys are like, oh, so you're invincible. And it's like, yes, but there's a catch. If enemies hit you, your break gauge goes down. If your break gauge goes down all the way, then you lose all of your buffs. So they can kill you that way. The other thing is, when you have the aura active, it is constantly draining your mana. So if you run out of mana, the buff wears out and enemies can kill you again. And that thing drains reasonably fast. So usually, whenever I would use it to achieve invincibility, it would be in very key moments where I'd be like, oh crap, I'm taking a ton of damage, but I have gauge, I have mana, I can kind of like pop this, not worry too much about getting killed. But if you get to a point in the game where you have infinite mana and infinite gauge, meaning that enemies can't break you, I was like, well, if I turn on my aura, I'm immortal. So at that point in the game, I was like, okay, so at this point they just want you to be super powerful, so it's okay, it's whatever. So I'm fighting through and destroying everything and not dying at all because I'm immortal and they can't stop me. And then eventually you get to the final boss. Now, the first part of the final boss, and I actually really enjoyed the first phase of the final boss. The first phase of the final boss is normal, so you don't have your infinite, or do you have? Well, actually, the first time that you do it, you do have your infinite gauge, don't you? I forget. I don't think you do. I don't think you have your infinite gauge when you get to the boss. But point is, when you're fighting the boss, you're normal. So the first time that I'm fighting the boss in phase 1, I'm normal, and I'm trying to come up with a strategy to beat this boss, because this boss is very aggressive. He's constantly just like attacking you and stuff. So my strategy was like, okay, I'm going to swap to the Knight class. And with the Knight class, you can activate a buff where every time that you block, you deal damage. And this is something that I love, by the way. I love the whole spiked shield thing, thorns builds, that type of stuff where enemies hit you, you block, and they take damage back. I personally find that very appealing. So I'm like, oh, dude, I'm going to kill the final boss with this. So I do that, And I get through the first phase of the boss because every single boss in this game has 2 phases. So I get through the first phase of the single boss, it goes into the second phase, and they trigger the infinite gauge. And I was like, oh. So I can get through the first phase using the block, and then second phase I swap to Liberator class, boom, make myself invincible. And so basically I was able to kill the final boss by just pressing down on R1 whilst being invincible. I didn't have infinite mana though, I only have an infinite gauge, so I did have to like pay attention to my mana and manage that, but I was pretty much invincible. And so that was one of those situations where I was left like, that was weird. It was weird. Why did they make that choice? But anyways, then I finish the game, and then once the game is finished, I was thinking to myself, okay, so people told me that I'm going to have to grind because the DLC is going to be in chaos difficulty. So I need to start grinding. And so I boot up the game, and the game tells you, oh, you can now play in extra mode. I was like, what the hell is extra mode? And extra mode is that mode where you have infinite gauge, infinite mana. And I was like, why would you unlock a new difficulty? Because once you finish the game, you get the chaos difficulty. Why would you unlock a new difficulty and at the same time unlock a mode where I can basically be invincible and not die to play in that difficulty? That was something to me that I just didn't understand, because I'm like, I mean, if you're adding a new difficulty, if you're making the game more challenging, you would expect that the point is to make it more challenging. But then you add this thing where you can basically skip all of the challenge and just become immortal. I don't know. I can't, like, these two ideas in my head are just bouncing around. Like, I don't get it. I find that to be a really weird design choice. So what I decided to do is, because I came in late to the game, I was like, okay, so let's just find out a way for me to grind stuff fast so that then I can just jump into the DLC and do the DLC, which people tell me it's really, really hard. So I unlock a mission at like a really high level, because you can use these shards to unlock missions at higher levels, which gives you better item score and stuff like that and loot. And I jump in there and I just grind this stuff down, which is very slow because I put enemies like way, 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 way above my level, but they can't kill me because I'm immortal, so I can just slowly grind them down. And so I grind a bunch of loot that way, and I was like item level 260 something. Then I jump into the stream that you guys saw, which there's a stream in the channel where I jumped in and I was like, okay, let's do the DLC. I bought the DLC. Let's do the DLC. Let's go get it. And that was a crapshoot, because my plan was like, okay, I got enough gear, so now I won't use extra mode and I'll jump into this thing. But I was just getting destroyed. You can see the stream. I was getting like obliterated by pretty much everything. So I'm like, okay, so let's turn on extra mode again, grind some more, and then go back into the game. And I find this to be a terrible way to play the game, where you basically make yourself overpowered, go grind gear, and then turn the overpowered mode off and play the game normally. It just... And I know that people would tell me, oh, you should play multiplayer, you should do it like this, you should do it like that, but there's not that many people playing the game in multiplayer right now. So, you know, it's not necessarily easy to just, oh yeah, I'll just jump in and play some multiplayer, it's whatever. So there's not that many people playing multiplayer, and it's just this very weird thing of making yourself broken, overpowered, grinding, and then going back into the game and try playing it normally. And so, you know, I went through DLC 1, then I went and I played a little bit of DLC 2. I hit a wall very early on, and I was like, okay, I'll just go grind this off stream, and then I'll figure it out. And I probably spent like a good amount of hours. I don't know how many. This has been like 5-6 hours grinding. Because I was just like, okay, if I'm grinding, I'm going to optimize this to the nth degree in extra mode and just grind myself as close as I can to item level 500. And then I want to turn it off, and I just want to go play the second DLC, the tower mode, and see how that works out. And so I grinded myself to 500, and it was a slow and painful process. I'll tell you that right now. It was very slow and painful. And then when I was done with that, I was like, okay, I'm done. I have plenty of gear. This should do just fine. Let's jump back into the tower. And then I jumped into the tower, and an enemy hit me twice, and I died. And I was like, yep, you know what? Maybe this DLC just isn't for me. Like, I understand that a lot, there's probably people that enjoy that type of difficulty, but it's not me. And I know that some people can say, so you're quitting on the game? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's your thought process here? And it's like, I don't feel like I'm quitting on the game. I feel like I played the game up until the point where it stopped being fun, which the DLCs, I didn't find them fun. It almost seems like it's a pattern to me with these games, because if, those of you who are around for like the Neo DLC, you'll remember that I also didn't vibe too well with the Neo DLC, and it wasn't because it was hard, but there were mechanics there that I didn't like. Neo 2, I think I played the first DLC. I don't think I played the other ones, but I just think that for me, maybe these games is more like, oh, you play the base game and then you're good. Because I loved what I've played of the base game of Stranger in Paradise. I had an absolute blast. I had a lot of fun learning the systems, learning how things work, learning all of that. When they started putting all of the other systems on top of it in the DLC, which, by the way, I didn't even tell you guys about the whole, what is it called? Trials of the Dragon King system, where you basically gimp yourself on purpose in order to get more rewards. So it's not just like, you're not just bloating the enemy's HP. You're also nerfing yourself, like reducing durations on your buffs, reducing your max health, reducing your mana, imposing all of these negative conditions on top in order to then go and fight and get even more rewards. Which to me was just weird, because, you have all of those things, but then you have a mode that breaks the game. Because you can base, which I did, by the way, you can see it in the stream. I basically turned all of the difficulty options to max minus like 1, that lowered your maximum HP, because that was the one way that they could kill me. And then I made myself invincible, and I grinded a bunch of missions down, and I was just like, this is so weird. I don't understand this concept. It's like I'm too weak to play the game normally, and I'm too powerful to play the game in extra mode. This is the weirdest thing. I personally don't get it. But, once I did the whole thing where I grinded to, the item level, and I know that some of you guys will say, oh, but you didn't take into consideration the synergies, because you had to plan around the synergies and all of these things. Like, yeah, I get it. You need the synergies, which, synergies is kind of RNG, whether or not you get the synergies that you want, which basically requires you to grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. And it just wasn't appealing to me, because after I did a bunch of grind, I still went to just the second DLC, not even the last one, because each DLC adds a new difficulty. So like, once you finish the main game, they give you Chaos difficulty, which is harder. Once you start on the second DLC, they give you Bahamut difficulty, which is even harder. Once you get on the next DLC, they give you the Gilgamesh difficulty, which is even harder. And I'm assuming that the DLC that came out on 27th, they give you yet another one on top of that. And I'm just in the Gilgamesh difficulty, getting 2-shot as a tank class. And I'm like, this is not fun. So, yeah, I went into that tower and I realized that, like, this is just not going to be fun for me. So I think I'm good. I think I'll play it until it was fun, and now I'm kind of done with it. But fundamentally, like I said, I'm super happy that I played it. I understand that there will be a crowd of people that really appreciates this level of difficulty and, the infinitely scaling of min-maxing your character to the nth degree, but it appears to be one of those situations where you're kind of expected to go online to look up at, a super powerful build or anything, or something like that, in order to make your character powerful enough to power through this DLC, because that is one of the problems of balancing all of the different classes that they've made, is that it feels like some classes in the end game are simply just not, forget about that. You're not bringing that class over here, because you're going to get completely and absolutely pummeled. And for people that enjoy that type of puzzle, great, keep enjoying it. For the rest of you that are considering playing the game, what I can tell you is that the base game, fantastic. Love it. Highly recommend it. The DLC, only if you're someone who really appreciates that, like, ridiculous level of challenge. Okay, like super mega hard, you're going to get one shot by damn near everything. You're going to have to optimize your character. You're talking like you're going to have to open up friggin' 50 Excel spreadsheets to figure out which buffs you want to get from which class, how you're going to level them up, which passive skills you want, which special attacks you want, and all this thing. And then at the end of the day, just keep in mind that you can also just turn on extra mode, break the game, and which the extra mode thing almost makes me think that the developers themselves saw what they were doing and they were like, yeah, this balancing ain't that great. Well, it's okay, just put in the extra modes that even if their class sucks, they can just become invulnerable and play through the game that way. And I'm just like, well, isn't that a bit weird? You know, it's just because I don't want to play like that. I don't think that's fun. I don't think it's fun it's almost like a cheat engine. It's weird. So yeah, that was the DLC stuff was a little bit weird for me, but you know, I still greatly enjoyed the game, and that's pretty much where I'm going to keep it when it comes to Stranger Paradise. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comment section of this video. Let me know if you guys enjoyed the series, which by the way is still available on the channel. You can watch it all the way up to the end and into my first foray into DLC. And I'm going to be moving on to other things that I'm more interested in. Thank you for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit it up with a like, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz. And I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.